We are very pleased to be joined by Kathleen Farris, Coach Kat, the business strategy coach, a big friend of GSD, and of course the industry, who's going to be moderating this panel. We're joined by Michael Thomas, Director of Educational Technology and Client Services, Claremont Graduate University. We're joined by Martin Nielsen as himself. We're joined by Brian Schofield, Director of Security, Raleigh Enterprises. And shortly, hopefully, we'll be joined by Nicole Filoris from Flipside Security. Business strategy. It's a bit more of a practical type of panel, isn't it, Kathleen? Welcome. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, and then of course you have the lead on this panel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an executive strategist and coach, and I get to work with a wide variety of constituents, people like Michael Thomas, who I totally enjoy working with, and Brian, some of the family businesses that maybe potentially you work with. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of family businesses. So again, we kind of look at that big strategy and then how does it distill down into actionable items, because we love some process and we love strategy, but then the execution piece is next, right? All the theory and talking is great, but if we can't institute anything and implement it, then it doesn't do anybody any good. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and yeah, big supporter of GSD and the kindness games.
I love it. Well, Coach Kat, you have the floor. Take it away, and I'll just be in the background.
Great. Thank you so much. So thanks, panelists, Brian and Martin. Nice to see you. And Michael, nice to see you again. So what I'd like to do is start off by asking kind of a big picture question. So from your perspective, why is the topic of business strategy, like why does it matter now? Why now versus all the other years that, in the security industry, there's been lots of discussions around strategy and process to keep the humans and to keep the IT, safe. So I'd love to hear from each of you. And Michael, if you want to start us off, why does this topic matter now?
It matters now more than ever for education, if nothing else. As a career educator, both as a faculty member and as an administrator, I will say it matters now more than ever because we have more transient data than we ever had before. If you have anything to do with the education industry at all, realize that 15 months ago, the whole system has gone through a paradigm shift of going pretty much something that was a very provincial and local to a classroom, and the classroom interface was more of a sage on the stage type of experience where 30 people would listen to a teacher of some kind, whether that's kindergarten through whatever professional education you are receiving, to basically conducting all your education through some sort of digital medium. And education in particular is probably the one industry in the world that intentionally breaks its own security. We do it to ourselves every day. There's always a justification to actually break our security. You can research a topic that's brand new and decide to hack your own network for some reason.
Sure.
Your users are actually your potential attack. And so in this particular case, business strategy and strategy for managed services, strategy for managed security is paramount because we have to outthink our people. But at the same time, we have to support our people. And so we have to do it in a cost-effective way. We are generally speaking the least funded of most industries. We are also highly regulated. We have, depending on the type of education we're delivering, federal laws like FERPA apply, or the HIPAA laws, or any of the other laws that mitigate issues with regard to human resources or student data or human subjects. So realistically, all of that requires a strategy that is thoughtful, that is meaningful, that is actually supported by not only the administrators of the IT, but the organization as a culture and as a whole, to be honest with you. And so business strategy is what leads that.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you talked about not only the business strategy of the process piece, but you're also talking about the humans. If you don't involve the human capital in the workforce and what you're doing, then it doesn't make a difference what strategy you have. So Brian, I'd love to hear from you. Why is this topic important to you? You've got a big job.
Yeah, so the topic is important because I think we've seen a huge shift in the past 18 months with available resources and the long-term planning to address the myriad of issues that came out of the COVID pandemic. So I think we're going to see people focusing more on maximizing their spend and really taking a thoughtful look about how do you become contactless, touchless security provider, or how do you select those types of equipment or solutions that you might need for your organization to make sure that your people are able to come to work every day. So I think the strategy is more important now than it has been, just because we have to be more thoughtful about things. In the days of let's put a camera here, let's do this, let's put card access on that, I think is really going to change, specifically around card access control and how people are going to enter their facilities. And that requires strategy, that requires engaging with your partners, making sure you got your physical and your infrastructure teams all working together. And it's just going to require some lead time.
Yeah, you made some really good points. You talked about the kind of re-onboarding into a new normal and thinking about all of those access points, because you maybe in the past you didn't have to think about all those because there's so many different things to think about now, kind of post-COVID. And the communication piece, which you talked about, is really important. I mean, especially in higher ed. Michael and I worked in higher ed, so, and as you have too, because of your background in teaching. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot to think about. So Martin, what about for you? Why is it important for you?
Yeah, so obviously I'm part of the security providers on the vendor side. So on my side, we're looking at over the next 10 years, there'll be like a huge inheritance transfer, like from the baby boomers to the millennials. They're saying about $68 trillion will change hands, between now and 2030. So a lot of the stuff we're looking at, right, is that strategy that we now have to work with the millennials over the next decade. And obviously they're very tech savvy. Everybody have smartphones, and it's very hard to like, how should I say it, like BS them about anything, right? Because you can literally double check or verify anything in a matter of seconds these days, right? So, and they've seen like what security can do for them as a service, right? So it's very important for us with the quality control moving forward and providing we still only get one chance, right, to make somebody happy, or else they'll get turned off that service. But the millennials are much more prone and much more accepting of the services that we have, because it's like what I call like the newer money, right? And they inherited it, so they like to spend it. So I really see some market for super high in quality, very specific services out there that they're willing to pay for.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point about the generational differences in how they view security overall. And then of course the spend, as a front end user, hey, I'm going to spend that money down now. It doesn't necessarily mean that I understand the entire risk mitigation perspective on my decision. So how do we, as the older generation, kind of bringing up that next generation, how do we instill that, hey, the pause and what you're looking at, you got money, we understand that, but how do we like invest it to, again, kind of carry that forward? So thanks for bringing that point up. So I'd kind of like to shift a little bit to like the security piece of both the IT and the physical security, and, looking at new products and services, both internally and externally. So if you're going to give advice to those that are watching today, both, the next generation of leaders and those that are leading today, like how would you give them strategic advice on what to think about when they're looking at how to integrate both of those, and understanding that they're so important to align, to do it more in tandem than in parallel? So what advice would you have?
Still me?
Yeah, go ahead. We can do a round robin. We got 30 minutes.
Sure. Yeah, so from our side, right, we realized a long time ago that we need to be a lot more technology driven on the executive protection, physical security side, and actually like cross-train people, not only go ask the people for advice in the IT department, but actually have people cross-trained enough to know like what they don't know. So at least they can call in the cavalry when they go out and like, especially from our side, right, when we do site surveys, and it used to be the guards and the gates and the guns and the camera systems, right? But now I just bought a new washer last week and it has Bluetooth, right? So now there's another failure point, right? So when you do a site survey, you're looking you can order directly, from your refrigerator, has an iPad attached to it, right? So there's all these points. Now your Roomba is running around cleaning your floors. So like some of the guys talked about earlier, you can literally have somebody with a hostile access point in front of your house and bypass most of the stuff that you have put in place, right? So we have become a lot more aware of those things on the physical side of things, and we really have to bring in the experts to mitigate those risks too, right? So now it's also become what we call 4th G or gigabytes, right? Has become part of that equation for us.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. So Brian, I'd love to hear from you too about, when you're looking at who do you bring in to be able to supply, the decision maker with that information? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So going back to the first part of the question is, what advice would you give to emerging security leaders? It's 2 parts. It's understanding your threat landscape, knowing what's coming at you, knowing what capabilities are out there, both from a physical and digital perspective. And the second part is doing a proper risk assessment of both your digital and your physical properties so that you know what your vulnerabilities are. The type of consulting work we do, we focus on what are the needs of the individual, of the company or the person that we're protecting, and then getting a good grasp of what it is that they're expecting from their security solutions, and level setting those expectations with them, but then making sure that they understand how those intended services are going to work. And for how we approach it is we bring in subject matter experts. So if you're a digital person, then that's the space we want to keep you in. And if you're a door person, then we're going to put you on doors. We look for people who are subject matter experts to fulfill those solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. That's key. So Michael, from kind of the education and training perspective, so if you're, working with a front-end user and someone like Martin to provide, kind of a solution to someone, is the education and the training kind of a teaser product to be able to pull them in per se on some main, product that they're potentially looking at purchasing, or what are your thoughts on that?
Education and training is the most important part of any security piece. As I already indicated, the field of education is probably the most risk prone field, just because we're just gluttons for creating holes for ourselves. And there's always a justifiable reason for that purpose. And you can proactively outthink your users and get the best, packet analyzers, or you can load balance your email, your traffic. You can get all types of firewalls. You can do whatever you want ahead of time and spend a lot of money doing it too. And yet it doesn't stop that user from opening that one email and giving out their password or sending their own personally identifiable information across to whoever it happens to be. Sure. At the same time, there's choices of whether or not you want to take the risk, and it might be culturally specifically better for you to actually remediate afterwards. Sometimes it's just better in that context to wait for the pain and take the pain. Realistically, though, the easiest and hardest way to address security especially in a managed service perspective is training the user and training the trainer. Where the actual managed service benefit comes out of it, though, is unlike, say, for example, myself and my team who work for a university specifically. When I was a managed service provider working for a Fortune 500, where we're servicing a number of sites across the entire country, then you have a set level of knowledge and a community of practice that's establishing security programs for the entire country, their entire user base, in which case it's much more established and you're not taking as much risk as you would being in your own little bubble and servicing your own specific users. But using colloquial or context-specific language that makes it easier to understand when you're communicating with folks, helping them understand why it's important to them, and then getting the tools to either proactively or retroactively remediate an issue is absolutely paramount. But it always starts and ends with the user.
Those front-end users and leaders who have to make decisions every day. Educating them. Martin and Brian, what do you think about that?
You want to go ahead, Brian?
Yeah, about which part? There was a lot said in there.
Hey, that's the whole idea of having a fireside chat. We get to kind of respond to what, you're feeling in the moment, and our viewers can take those nuggets and kind of carry them forward and follow up with you later. So
there's definitely some benefit to what Michael was talking about, and understanding how each different industry works. I've taught in higher ed. I've also led studio security teams. They're very different beasts. And so you have to understand how to work within those different cultures to be effective with whatever solutions you're applying, but also with how you train your employees and staff. Certain personalities and certain industries understand training, the importance of it from a safety perspective. So gas and oil has a really great culture around that, whereas movie studios, not so much. However, when it comes to intellectual property, they definitely understand that. So it's just understanding the framework with which you're working in.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point, Martin. Go ahead. Yeah, about the culture piece, really kind of understanding the culture of that industry.
Right, we've seen a big leap forward in the online training platforms and the online courses. I mean, a lot of providers had a little bit internally, but now there's always also a lot of external training being done, set up as professional courses or like video training, right, for internal quality control. And now with all the things that are coming online as far as protective equipment or decontamination, a lot of those things can be put into not only like the physical training part, but also a video training part, right, that you can then watch every 3 months or 6 months and have people sign off on and collect that quality control data. And if you have turnover, like the new people can get on the same page from day one. So I've really seen a big acceleration in the way that the online training is being done. You obviously can learn how to hit a car or make a J-turn on a computer, right? Where you can get a understanding of all the like the physics and the mathematics behind like what happens in weight transfers and stuff in the car. You don't have to sit in the classroom from that portion, right? So you can take all that stuff now as a prerequisite, and then you can show up maybe half the time of what you used to do the physical part.
Yeah, that's really a good point. So kind of shifting to ideas, front-end users, we always have great ideas. I'm sure you've all experienced that, where a user will come to you and say, or a leader of an organization, hey, I'm looking at my security and I feel like I need this on the IT side, or I need this, kind of looking at my organization and, private security detail. And I know I've worked with a higher education institution in the past where they ended up getting $100,000 worth of equipment that they never were able to use. It sat in a storage unit because they didn't know what they didn't know. And so, right. And being vulnerable, generationally, going back to your point, Martin, to be okay with saying, hey, I've been leading this organization for 25 years. However, I don't understand. To be able to say that, I don't understand what I don't know. So I might buy something that I really don't need. So how do we continue to work with security people that need security and educate them, and like how do we enroll them to make good decisions from a strategic perspective? Like what process would you walk them through? Brian, do you want to take that first, kind of talking a little bit about that?
Sure. In addition to training our staff, we also have to train our clients in what the expectations are from whatever solution it is they think that they're purchasing. All too often, consumers of security services look to popular media as a guiding light as to what is possible out there, and they think that you can have a special forces team sitting around the corner ready to go for your particular issue, and those things require some wind-ups. So understanding the capabilities of your security solutions, either digital or physical, is really important, and that's incumbent upon the provider to set that expectation with their consumers.
Yeah, that's a good point. Martin, how about you?
What was the original question again? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good question. Kind of all intertwined.
So buyers, how do we educate, right?
Yeah, because what happens is I can imagine, and you may have had this, where front-end users say, hey, I need this solution. You're trying to sell it to them, and then potentially they don't really need it. They don't buy it. They say, yes, they need it, but then they end up not buying it for you. And you've created this brand new solution that you've done market research on, and then they end up not buying it. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been on both sides, right? My last was on the vendor security provider side, but I've also been the in-house director of programs, right? When you go to ISC or you go to GSX and you talk to people and you try to make them, develop or change whatever they have to fit your needs. And then 6 months later, it's almost already outdated when they have a solution for you, right? And you're looking elsewhere. or there might have been a turnover already in the industry, right? And you almost have to start over. So technology literally every 6 months is like it's turning over, right, for something new. So it's very hard
outdated
to keep up with on both sides, right? As a provider, you have to spend a lot of time on R&D and T&E. And then when you finally get there, people are already on to the next thing, right? And as far as the clients, I'll agree with Brian. We have to educate them on one, so they don't get taken advantage of by people trying to sell them stuff they don't need. And two, also what is realistic and what is the true capabilities. There's a lot of people that sell stuff that they think can do a whole bunch of different things. And then when you're actually T&E it doesn't do half of what they're saying, or it's like several years or months, behind of what they're actually claiming, right? So it's an educational way, I think, in both directions.
Yeah, good points. Michael, what about you? What do you think?
I agree with what both gentlemen said. There was a reason why the customer came to you, right? So in this particular case, I would find out what their need was and what their incentive was to actually come to you first, and find out what their goal is. Then come up with a recommendation based on your subject matter expertise or your organization's subject matter expertise, and provide that optimized solution to them and see what their thoughts are and how it would be employed by them. And possibly even especially if you're trying to get them to spend money, encourage them to compete. Actually ask for other vendors and other integrators.
Get a couple bids.
Participate in this process, because ideally we'd actually all be providing the same solution. But if they can provide a better solution at lower cost, why not? Why not see what it is? Sometimes actually spending more can be bad. Sometimes, not always, or it actually will justify your spend because you'll see how piecemeal the other solution happened to be in this particular case. And then in terms of implementation, there's always the education piece, of course, but then there's, plan for the best, but create a method of recourse for the worst. And to Brian's point about access control, a very real experience that I'm having actually right now is I spent 6 months dealing with access control, putting out Blackboard card swipe access to a whole lot of doors right now because the campus has been empty, right? But then the subject matter expert who's actually responsible for combining our actual network controllers with the Blackboard management software decided to change organizations right in the middle of the process after we're finishing up the doors. So then we have to actually find that expertise elsewhere.
Yeah, we start all over again, back to Brian's point.
Actually provide a solution to the problem you're already going to have.
Yeah.
That's what instills confidence in the buyer. If they're buying, that's what instills confidence in the user if they were a long-time user, is the fact that they know that you have the solution, even if the solution does not exist yet, or if the problem doesn't exist yet. So in that respect, all of that goes back to, again, that relationship with the user, the education of the user, the culturally specific, contextually specific language you're using with the user. It's how you communicate with the user.
But that's a good learning point, right? Because now you have to have a lot of depth. You might need 2 or 3 people that know the same thing to avoid that in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah, it goes back to that cross training to make sure that somebody, you got plan A, B, C. Here's your entire risk mitigation plan of how you're going to move that work forward. I love it. So any other strategic advice that you would give leaders who are watching this today around thinking about, okay, if I'm looking at my plan for the future, let's say it's 12 months. I've heard a couple speakers today say, don't plan, I was taught you plan 10 years out and you re-engineer back, and how do you get there? And that's how I work with our clients. We all know you can't do that with technology, security, you can't do that. So if you're going to give leaders advice who are watching today, like what workflow or process, like I use my own when I work with clients, but what would you recommend they think about from a decision-making perspective? I'm going to look at what I'm going to do for the next 12 months. I'm Raley's, I'm Lundberg Family Farms. I have high risk with, my leaders. What would you recommend? Like what workflow or process would you suggest they go through when thinking about planning out for the next 12 months?
So on the business side, they need to understand what their principals are doing. Are there mergers down the line? Are there things that are going to interrupt your business plans that I'm sure if Michael knew that his lead person was going to dip out and go to another company, that he probably would have backed out his timelines a little bit differently. So I think knowing what your company is doing or what your client is doing, what their plans are, and then understanding what are the emerging threats, and putting that together again back with your assessment, and then making a strategy from that is what I would recommend. The other component the other part I would suggest that emerging leaders think about is technology is not the final solution for everything, and invest in the people who work with you. That's really the key. And if you take care of them, they're going to do amazing things for you.
100%. On the product side, I would just add, a lot of times if you see whatever is emerging, right, that's coming out new, and then you just put either counter or anti in front of it, and then you have what's coming after, right? Like when the drones became like the big thing starting in whatever 2010, right? And then I already knew, okay, now the next thing is going to be counter drones or counter measures or anti measures, right? So you can be a little bit ahead on some of these things if you kind of know what's emerging. Then you put the counter or the anti in front of it, and then you kind of see what have to, come after it, right? From our side on the physical security aspect, if it's some sort of a threat or nefarious, right, then we have to either counter it or find some kind of measure to negate it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Michael, how about you?
From the customer side, I would, regardless of my role in the organization, want to seek in the buy-in and the overall goal of the organization itself. I mean, you never even know if we might still be in the same physical location 10 years from now. We might pick up and move to an entirely different city. That's entirely possible. In fact, it happens all the time. So I would want the buy-in from my leadership, as well as maybe even all the way down to the secretary that might be impacted. But at the same time, from the vendor side, as a former vendor myself, I would want to understand who it is I'm talking to. Just because I'm talking to Michael Thomas over there, Director of Educational Technology, doesn't mean I'm talking to the guy who's making the decision. I'm just talking to the guy who's gathering the information and might actually be the person who implements, but not the guy who's making the decision. In which case, I'd want to gather as much information from the stakeholders that are impacted as much as possible. In both cases, it's the same, but it's also different because it's how you're gathering that support and that information. But that combined will lead to the better relationship with the vendor and the customer over the long term, and help maintain that relationship over that long term. Maybe when you go to compete again, because of that established relationship, you're going to continue with them, even if it is not the cheapest solution. And that vendor customer relationship is exactly that. It's a relationship. It's symbiotic. We work together, whether it's I'm calling IT for a help desk type of solution. I'm calling because I need that email to be pulled from everyone in Office 365, or I'm calling because all my data center is being hacked right now. It's all a relationship, and it's all based on how we implement that relationship and maintain it over time.
Yeah, all good points. And I think we could have a whole nother session, Brian, on how do you invest in the human capital to help prepare them to make those decisions, because our emotions get in the way sometimes when we're making decisions. And so in being agile, Martin, back to your point, and when Michael had to make the decision of what do I do now? Well, now I have to learn to, self-regulate and all those things that maybe some of those generations. So, hey, Pelham, there we go. There's another whole 2 or 3 sessions that we could talk about. How do we invest in the human capital to make even better decisions to move the organizations forward?
No, I like it. And it's a lot more hands-on, isn't it? It's a lot more practical. We can talk about why things are not secure till we're blue in the face. But how do we make a business around the opportunities presented? That's suddenly something more real. And that's why it's nice to have physical and cyber on the panel at the same time as well. Because you can be sure, as Martin said, you just add anti onto it, and then suddenly it'll be a new business. New cyber threats to physical security boots. I don't know. Boots are getting cyber threats. Well, let's get the new anti-cyber boots. All right, I'm taking it to new levels. I know.
It's okay. It's been a long day of lots of really great information.
I know. I love it. Well, Kathleen, thanks for being such a great moderator. Please give Brian, Michael, Martin, and our moderator, Kathleen Farris, a big virtual round of applause. We look forward to seeing you in the audience.